and welcome everybody to the Speakers Bank podcast, Our Voices, Our Views. This is our opportunity to share with you our thoughts and our insights on different hot topics that we feel that is relevant to share. My name is Mimi Laurelia. I'm the program coordinator of Speakers Bank. I have with me my podcast team from Vic Uni. We've got Annika, Georgia, and Billy, and of course the podcast team, the original trio, Kathryn, Nathan, and Storm. Hello, Kathryn, Nathan, and Storm. I'd like you to greet the viewers and listeners today.
Hello, everybody. I
Hi.
hope everyone's well in lockdown. I know it's challenging, but we hope to bring you a very, very informative podcast today.
Fantastic. So we are what do you call this? Multi-location, multi-located. We're all over parts of Victoria, and we've got one person interstate joining us today. Nathan, how are you from Queensland?
I'm well. How are you, Mimi?
I'm good, thank you. So we're all suffering. I'm not sure about the Queensland state, but Victoria has been on an extended lockdown 6.0. I'm so over it, but I'm not sure if things are a little bit more relaxed where you are, Nathan. Can you give us a little bit of a snapshot in terms of the current COVID situation in your particular?
Yeah, so basically, as far as I've seen it in the media, it's more just about the whole mask mandate. I mean, we've been relatively on top of it. I mean, at the moment, Queensland's, as far as I'm aware, has sealed up their border to New South Wales, who's in a pretty dire situation. But things are, I suppose, relatively normal. I guess one thing that's been happening at the moment, they are looking at starting up, I think they're called quarantine camps. And there's going to be one just west of, like, out west.
Okay.
So
that's all
it'll
right.
be interesting to see how that goes.
Okay, no worries. Well, thank you for the update, Nathan. It's always interesting for us to hear what's happening in your side of the woods. But
Yeah.
today, the special topic that we agreed to talk about is around housing, SDA, accommodation for people living with disability. And I think it's a hot topic because we all want a sense of independence. And obviously, Kathryn has, done her bit to make this a reality for her. And Nathan, I think you're struggling or you have some ideas or thoughts around housing. And I'd like to get Annika to shoot the first question. Annika, we've got a list of questions for our team. Are you able to, just give us one of those questions so our team can start talking about that?
Yes, so today we're going to talk about housing and SDA. First of all, what is SDA?
Okay, anyone from our team would like to discuss what they think SDA means or what you know about SDA? Nathan, maybe you can start.
So I believe, and I think I've gotten this wrong once before, but I think it's specialized disability accommodation. So what
Correct.
that essentially means is that they will build you, or they will construct houses that basically. So what happens is, investors come along and they say, well, like to be a landlord and retrofit houses and get some money. So they go, all right, well, so the NDIS will basically come along and say, well, we'll pay you SDA payments rather than collecting a bond, and that basically repays not only any loan on the house, but it also repays for value of home and the cost of modification. So essentially, what that means for someone like me, if I get SDA funding, it means that I will get, say for example, the equivalent of social housing, but everything will be tailored for my disability, for example. So everything will be customized the way that I need it in order to live a normal life.
Mm-hmm. So what's the criteria for a person to be eligible for an SDA? Is it just because you are an NDIS participant, or are there other requirements that you know of?
So essentially, it depends on who you ask, because nothing's ever straightforward with the NDIS. There is, at least as far as I know, 4 levels of SDA. So you've got, a relatively low level. Then you've got what's called disability access. You've got high, and then you've got high support, and so on. So basically, the requirement is that you need to have, at least as far as I know, a physical or even I guess an intellectual disability that would, but that basically, what am I trying to say? Sorry. It basically, that you need to have a physical or mental disability, that essentially deems that you cannot live in ordinary housing or even social housing. So a lot of people that get SDA can have intellectual disabilities. They can have sensory issues. So they can have autism. They can have, mental illnesses. So there is actually a level of SDA which is called robust. So that basically means that everything is reinforced, so that if someone had a tantrum or a meltdown, the house would be able to, withstand, anything that they may do, whether it be, hit a wall or throw something. In terms of the criteria, this is a bit of a touchy issue for me at the moment, but essentially, as I said, you have to have a form of disability that does not enable you to live in a normal home. So, for example, in the home that I'm in at the moment, it's very cramped because of all my equipment, and it's very small. And it's not that the equipment isn't suitable, because it is. It's more just that the house isn't suitable. I've been knocked back. Sorry, I'm not doing well today. I've been knocked back for housing simply because I told a real estate that I had disability equipment, and they made a judgment based on my disability that my equipment wouldn't fit in the home, even though the home that I had applied for at one point actually had someone previously that obviously had a disability, because it had wider rooms, threshold ramps, a chair in the shower, and a wider bathroom. So it's one of those things where not only do I have a limited budget, but the reality is my own disability equipment could theoretically disadvantage me, for housing, because landlords, especially in the current, housing crisis, don't want anyone, let alone somebody like me, who they see as a liability.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I want to unpack that a little bit more, Nathan. I
Sure.
want to give a chance to Kathryn and Storm to share their thoughts around that. But Annika, you have another question to ask the team. Maybe that will help unpack this housing situation in regards to how it applies to your individual circumstances. Annika?
I think that leads into the next question nicely, which was, what is your current housing situations, if you wanted to touch on that?
So we'll get Kathryn and Storm and Nathan to share that, because obviously they have different housing and accommodation situations at the moment. Kathryn, are you able to share with us in general, how are you accommodated at the moment? I've kind of alluded to the fact that you have been independent for a number of months now.
Yes, I've been living at a home for nearly a year now, but realizing that the support isn't there for me. So when I was living in a bungalow previously, I was getting one-on-one support, like physical support. But now I'm in this house. Friendship is great, but not understanding where my needs come in and not how to address those. So at the moment, my NDIS is getting reviewed. Hopefully, and keeping the doors open to see what the right fit is. In my situation, in my disability, because it's really mild, like intellectually, I'm not great. I mean, I am great, like communication-wise, but it's very confusing. Like, hang on. This is very hard. Because my needs are really mild, and I only need certain amount of support, but realizing living in this shared house is, yeah, so with my hopeful, like, the yeah, it's very tricky. How can I express it?
So, Kathryn, just to ask you a question, when you say there's limited support, what is that is limited for you to enable you to really function well in your house? Is there a problem with your house itself?
No, that's fine. Like, living independently, like, I cook, but I need certain help with, like, making sure making sure my room is tidy, keeping up to top with it, helping with, like, shopping lists, like, understanding what do I need. So it helps when someone actually is showing me how it's done, not telling me that because someone like me really needs that practical support or that physical one-on-one support. Like, so, like, with so I've been with support workers for a while, but because I've been in this house share, all my funding has gone to that.
Okay. So that means you have the house, which you really, really wanted to have for the longest time ever, so you can have your independence.
Yeah.
The house functions well for you. It's got everything that you need. You've got your own space there. You've got a fantastic roommate. You're very near to where everything is that you need. You feel safe where you are. What is lacking for you is the supports that you need for your day-to-day, not a problem of the house itself. Am I correct? Okay, thank you for that, Kathryn. Now, in Storm's case, it's quite a different situation because he needs a lot of support, but he moved into a very recent or new home. How is your current house working for you, Storm, in terms of your physical movement or your needs? Is your new house delivering what you require for your day-to-day?
The new house is going well. I must admit, when I first moved into there, it was very, very difficult because there's certain sort of supports that you need, and they didn't have rails in there because we thought that the home person or the company that we bought the house with would have already put that in our plan, because they know that I have a disability, but unfortunately they didn't. So we had to get an occupational assessment to come in and see what I needed. But unfortunately, I'm still struggling a little bit around the house. I'll give you guys an example. Sometimes there's a light switch that you need to turn on and off before you go to bed. And sometimes my balance isn't that great, depending on the day. And it's very, very hard to leave your crutches and then move your arm and then switch off the light because you've got to balance yourself and then make sure you press the button and then put your hand back on the crutch. So that can be very difficult at times. And I'm finding just the ability to do certain things is quite limited in terms of going to the toilet sometimes, because I have to do a certain sort of action to do it. I can't just go and reverse back. I have to twist myself and go onto the toilet seat. And it's been very, very difficult because of the lockdown. Obviously, you can't have an OT come in and have a look at your house. So
Yeah.
that's been one of the challenges. And one of the questions I want to ask Kathryn is that do you find that your support's limited because of the lockdown as well?
Yeah, so I'm finding it challenging because coming out of my routine is a big challenge, and it is for a lot of people with disability that their routine's taking, especially those that don't quite understand what is going on. So me,
what about you, Nathan? I just want to ask Nathan a question. Have you
Sure.
had have you had a recent a recent assessment with the OT, and then have you asked the OT to give it to your landlord to make sure that he knows that your disabilities are required for help around the house?
Yeah. So when we moved into this property, which we're very, very fortunate to get last year when the pandemic was at its height, they actually are aware, Storm, that I have a disability. In fact, I was able to get low cost handrails installed in the shower with landlord permission. The problem that I find is not so much, for example, even, like finances, I understand it's hitting everybody. So I'm gonna put a pin in that. But what I will say is my primary problem with my current house is that, like, under the private rental market, for example, a real estate or a landlord don't have to give permission for, me to have additional things installed in the house. And so basically, it's one of those situations where, aside from the current housing crisis, in order to be more independent, I basically, in order to have, I guess, a normal marriage, a normal life, whatever you want to call it, in my current situation with my current house, I will need a much bigger property. And the problem that we're finding is, and this is part of the reason I didn't end up moving to Toowoomba this year, was because there is nothing out there, and even the very few properties you find that would even be remotely suitable, you get knocked back for. In fact, I'm at the moment looking into, I guess, appealing an SDA rejection, and one of the reasons they basically gave for rejecting me was they didn't believe that, despite photos and a detailed 50-page report and a functional assessment, they didn't believe that I was severe enough. So what I think happened is that basically NDIS had the wrong assessment, and coupled with that is that they gave the excuse, well, you need to explore other housing options. So we've basically done that. And even, for example, the Department of Housing have said, we don't have any stock of any disability, like any modified housing for those with disabilities. So there's basically nothing else that would suit us. There's no community housing, no social housing, no public housing. So all we have, in order for me to live a normal life, is SDA, really.
And what has the local coordinator that you are with has told you, has like done about this?
Well, basically, as much as the support coordinator, for example, can give advice, we got the response back as to why we were rejected. So now, what it's about doing is it's about filling in forms to lodge to basically appeal the decision and basically say, here is our evidence, this is why we believe that we qualify. Because the reality is, when you look at the criteria, which is so complex, I actually hit every single marker. I have, I even have a report from a psychologist to basically say, I can't even share house. I have to have a modified home on my own with my wife. I tick, without going into too much detail, I essentially tick every box. So basically, what I believe may have happened is, I don't know if you've had this done, Storm, but NDIS has an assessment tool that they use, which basically is only really suitable for anyone, from say, 4 or 5 up until 18, right? And they basically they ask you a whole bunch of questions, and they grade your level of disability from level 1 to level 4. Level 4 is like I think it's like really, it's like the second highest severity you can get, and level 1 is like a very, very mild impairment. So it turns out that when I first applied for the NDIS, they had me at a level 2, and when they reassessed me, I was then a level 4. So what they think might have happened is that when they sat down and made the SDA decision, they looked at all the reports from the OT and everything else under the sun that we gave them, and then they basically I believe they based their decision based on the single assessment tool that the NDIS used, and basically denied me because what I was submitting to them didn't align up with what they had down, on paper. So I think it's basically a case of, let's forget what the paperwork said. This is what our policy says. This is what his current assessment, through us says. So we'll just go with that. So now it was basically about being reassessed, which thank goodness I have been. And now it's just basically about going through the appeals process. Because the thing is...
Yeah, hang on. So just, Nathan, just to interrupt you a little bit, I just want to clarify that based on what you're saying, it seems like despite the fact that there are obviously a lot of tests and assessments done, it's still not enough, although you've ticked all the boxes. Essentially, that's what you wanted to say, right? So I think that's what's making things a little bit complicated for you. And I do realize what you said about the lack of stocks or kind of housing that's more appropriate for your needs. But shouldn't your landlord be the person to apply for modifications in his home to enable you to function well? Would that be an alternative kind of arrangement that's potentially available for your situation?
Well, here's the tricky thing, though, with private rent, Mimi, is that in the private rental market, I'm seen, just as any other tenant. So, for example, the issue is twofold in the sense that, yes, theoretically, I could go to my real estate, for example, and apply for major modifications. The issue is twofold in the sense that, number one, for major modifications, the NDIS will only ever fund it once. So if I were to move in 5 years and I've had a major modification done and they've, knocked down walls and done a renovation, the NDIS will never, ever do that again. So they'll never fund it again. That's the first issue. The second issue is that the landlord is well within their rights to say, we don't want to grant you this major or even minor modification. If the house doesn't suit you, you basically just need to leave. And in reality, that's why essentially where my wife and I are just basically kind of staying in the accommodation that we've got until we can get SDA, because there is literally nothing else out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm getting that we are already discussing the barriers or the challenges in terms of the housing. So you're talking about SDA, Nathan, as it really applies to you. And Storm, you talked about, for example, the light switch. I'm imagining, as you were talking about that, you can probably do a very smart and wired home. Maybe you can say, Alexa, turn off my lights, or Alexa, turn on my lights. I think that's a solution that you can potentially explore with your mom and your sister, and maybe that will help you. And in terms of your toilet, do you have a room that has a toilet near you, or do you still have to go to the family toilet to get?
Oh no, we've got 2 toilets in the house.
Yeah, and one is closer to you. Is one closer?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is. But the issue is that when I'm having a bad day and the muscles aren't working correctly, it's just hard to turn my body into the toilet seat.
Right.
So if I could somehow,
thing.
yeah, it's a muscular thing. So what I've been trying to do is just been doing a bit of warm-ups to make sure that when I do go for that first time, that it's not hard to get in because my muscles are already warmed up and they're able to do the normal action to get into the toilet.
Yeah.
Because I think when I wake up, my body's really stiff, and it can get really, really hard to just do simple movements.
Yeah.
And with the lockdown, it's sort of made it even worse because in Victoria, there seems to be a law. I know this is unrelated, but it is kind of related. There seems to be a law passed down here that if you are with an exercise physiologist, that exercise physiologist cannot come to see you in your physio area. So that hasn't
Cannot come
helped.
to see you.
They cannot come to see me at the clinic that they work in. But you can go and see a physio. But that doesn't make any sense to me because
But you were saying that you can only do online consults with your exercise physio. Like you do
Yeah.
a Zoom and then they can tell you how to do the exercise.
correct. But I'm finding that the online thing doesn't really do anything
Yeah.
because I need one-to-one physical
Yeah.
treatment,
Yeah.
and I'm sure Nathan understands that because
Oh,
he's in the same sort of boat as me when it comes to
absolutely, and that's my primary reason for my wife and I trying to apply for SDA is because I require one-to-one support, and I think the issue that I think you kind of touched on a little bit, Storm, is that when it comes to say Victoria and Queensland, much like the NDIS in general, whenever you speak to someone or whatever government you're under, the policy is always different and it's always changing, and you
It's
don't
very
get
frustrating.
notified. So
Very frustrating.
say for example, and I'll give you a very loose example that has nothing to do with housing, but I'll give you the example nonetheless. I had transport funds under the NDIS. Now I had level 3, which basically meant that if we ever had, in Queensland, in-person speaking gigs again, or if I was just volunteering in general and I needed transport to get somewhere, they would give me a fortnightly sum of money to contribute towards, taxis or transport or whatever. Now, in my review, that changed and I was downgraded to level 2 because technically I'm still a public speaker. But, that requirement has now tightened. And so that's why they're knocking back. I think that's part of why, in at least my opinion of what I've read in the media, they're also knocking people back for SDAs. There are SDAs around, at least here in Queensland, that have sat empty for 6-12 months because the SDA affiliated with NDIS aren't actually, for whatever reason, filling them. Like there's been countless people getting knocked back and having to appeal the decision.
Okay. So I guess in the time that we spent here in this episode, we've already touched on obviously what SDA is, your current housing situations are, what are some of the barriers or the challenges that you have at the moment. I really agree with Kathryn. It's the supports, not just because of COVID, but also supports in general that really should be the type of supports that apply to your different situations and the appropriate ones that suit your needs. And we talked about like transport in Nathan's case, which is going to be discussed in greater detail in another episode, transport barriers and transport accessibility issues. Maybe, Anika, you can ask the final question about housing in general, which is in the bottom of our list. Anika?
Yes, so our last question of the day was, why do you think SDA is important for people living with a disability?
It's important because, well, I haven't come across SDA yet, but it's one of my things to look into. But SDA is to help people like me, Storm, or Nathan. More like there's a lot more for Nathan and Storm than there is for me because my needs are very mild, and a lot of the housing situations is more for people that have mobility issues. So, for an example, there's a complex just got built in Williamstown under the organisation called Summer Housing. The tenants that are moving there are more at Storm and Nathan's level, not for me, which makes it a lot hard because the houses are brand new. It's really nice, but it's, or even higher than Storm and Nathan. Like, you're looking at people that need hoist out of bed. And, okay, I didn't know that until I looked into it. But there's, but SDA, there should be a variety if you're looking, like, with me, I never give up. I always keep doing my research until something, and I'll try this. Like, I've tried what I'm in now. I've tried that for nearly a year, realizing it's not really working out. Like, giving it a good shot is very important instead of saying, whatever.
You should be very proud of that, Kathryn, that you gave it a shot.
Oh, yeah, I am.
And you definitely had a crack at it.
Yeah, I made good relationships with them. It's just the support that I'm not getting, which I need, but that's no one's fault. That's just how, whatever. But yeah, anyway, SDA would, like, there might be housing, like, for people at my level where a support worker will just pop in to see how things are going, or you could go into a private rental like you, Nathan, and someone like, but it's under whatever, and you just have someone like a support worker come and making sure you do your, things are going okay. So that's me.
Okay, thank you, Kathryn. Any final thoughts, Storm and Nathan, before we go?
I think. Oh, sorry. You go first, Nathan.
Oh, sorry, Storm. I was just going to say, I think SDA is important because it enables, people with, varying disabilities, whether, physical, intellectual, whether they have autism, whatever, to live a normal life in secure accommodation. And, for me, for example, living where I am now and living in an SDA is the difference between, me, functioning like, any other husband would, and me, not like, I know Storm, for example, you'd be familiar with people often saying, oh, you'd hear the phrase, oh, I'm so sorry that you're suffering with, cerebral palsy, or you're suffering from your disability. In my mind, I'm not suffering. The only reason that I end up, I guess, suffering is because I don't have the appropriate equipment to enable me to live an everyday life. At the moment I'm existing, I'm not living. And I think the NDIS and the SDA need to realize that.
Yeah, because the SDA, from what I've been hearing about, is more about life-changing opportunity. It's like, how do I say this? It's like when you buy a car. That's a big life event.
Yeah.
When you buy your first car, getting an SDA is like a big life event for us because it gives us that reassurance that we can live our lives the best way we can, but we need supports to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And at the moment, the SDA haven't been providing enough supports. Now, whether or not that whether or not that changes after after COVID remains to be seen. But from what I've been hearing, that there needs to be a lot of work done to get it in a much more better position than what it already is at the moment.
Okay. Yep. Nathan, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I've got some final thoughts. I was just going to mention that in reality, with the SDA, you could theoretically get everything you need. You can get smart homes within an SDA, and I think the reality is that while the NDIS, for example, in my review, the reviewers said, I'm sorry you've been rejected, but we're not responsible for, accommodation, because I talked about, well, what if I end up homeless and end up selling the $15,000 wheelchair you've given me? And she said, oh, we're not responsible. And I thought that is such, a almost rude statement, because the NDIS really technically should be, really stepping up to the plate and saying, if I'm going to give you expensive equipment and I acknowledge that you can't live in any normal property, they should have a certain amount of responsibility to say, we need to get you appropriate accommodation for you and your wife or whoever you live with.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Nathan.
No
I'm
worries.
sure the words have really gone through, and we truly understand
Yeah.
what you're trying to convey to our listeners, so that they are fully aware that these are real life issues that are happening to you. So thank you, Anika, Georgia, and Billy, for joining us today. Thank you, Anika, for helping me facilitate this episode. We'll get Georgia and Billy to help us out in the next episode. So in the meantime, thank you guys. It's been a wonderful discussion around housing, accommodation, and supports that are required to really ensure that our friends who are living with a disability really live the fullest life that they could. So on behalf of the team here from Speakers Bank, this is Mimi saying goodbye for now. Please don't forget to like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on our different social media platforms. See you all in the
Bye.
next episode. Bye.